little bit late, uh, figuring out the technology that I have never used before. I've never been on Facebook Live before. So welcome to Poets in Pajamas, number 103. I'm Donna Vorreyer, reading to you from my couch in the Chicago area where it is very cold and very dark now that we have rolled the clocks back for an hour. And it's my understanding that it might take some time for people to, there's a lag time between me seeing that people are here and being able to hear the reading. So for the first few minutes, I just want to talk to you a little bit about my new collection, which is what I'm going to read from, which is called To Everything There Is, which is terrible glare, from Sundress Publications, who sponsors this wonderful reading. I've been lucky enough to have done now all three of my collections with Sundress. I feel very, very lucky that I kind of got pulled out of the slush um, about 8 years ago, and they've been a wonderful partner ever since. This book, To Everything There uh, is a combination of celebration and elegy for both of my parents, who I lost very close together in 2018. And the title, it took us a while to come up with the right title. I had a holder title that wasn't working, and this title I think finally was the right one. To Everything There is a phrase you might recognize. It's famous from the Bible in Ecclesiastes. To everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven, which also then became a very famous bird song. And uh, part of that message of that section is that everything is a cycle, that things are going to happen that are good and that are bad, that are beginnings and that are endings, and that's just the way the world works. And since this is a book about both death and grief and loss and also great love, I thought it was apt title for that reason. Another way that the title functions for me is that it's a letter to everything there is, to the world. Um, you'll see lots of natural images in this book, everything from snakes and frogs and deer to Queen Anne's lace and the sea. And I think we often use the natural world to try and explain what we're feeling. Uh, it's a common way for people to connect to ideas is to run them through a natural filter. So the title works on that level, and then also as a gift to everything there is, and the everything there is love. Love is what weaves the net beneath us when we are struggling through times of despair or loss or not having any hope. And so the book is really uh, all three of those things. So before I start reading, uh, I'll talk to you a little bit about the poems, which are kind of put into three sections. When I first started writing this book, the poems were more about just kind of general like change and the discord that comes with getting older and life changes and body changes and just the way the world seems to look at you and the way that changes. And then my parents got ill and that kind of discord changed for me. And I was having difficulty writing at all for a while. And one of the first things that helped me start writing again was to go back to what comforted me about poetry when I first started reading it as a kid, which was rhyme and order, right? In a life that felt like it was out of order or out of control. The use of rhyme and order, and sometimes even other people's words, were the first ways into writing about this for me. So the first three poems I'm going to read, two of them feature rhyme schemes, which is not something that's common in my work. And then the third one is a cento, and we'll talk about that when we get to that one. So the first poem I'm going to read is called The Lost Art of Giving Up. The ocean does its blue so well that other colors only lie. See, a red bloom will rise if I slice at the swell of the skin's blue-green river. So I swim until I wilt and shiver. Its salt can sting, its waves cradle or tumble, sweep to flush me under in a whitecap's rush toward shore, if, remaining idle, I give myself over to its considerable breadth and hue. Yet In its infinite size, I am less alone. So I stroke to keep my head clear. Not ready to sleep in its restless bed, I weave a necklace of seaweed. Paddle back to you. No blue. Is that blue? Speaking of sleep, I don't really own pajamas, so I wear a lot of band t-shirts to sleep in. So shout out to the National in there. Sleep Well Beast tour on my t-shirt. The next poem uh, also uses rhyme and form, but also came from a time when after my parents died where I continued to receive all these questionnaires and like supposedly supportive and helpful information from different places about how to work through grief, and none of them really helped very much. And so I got the idea of thinking about some of the old tests that people used to give in psychological situations. So this is called self-administered Rorschach test. An elastic band spasming, a damaged ampersand, an ochre door half open, a team of oxen half hitched, no elephants, bears, or butterflies, too common and insufficient for this, an intrusion of insects, a kestrel's nest, a zigzagged system of sticks, a blistered lower lip. Outside, the clouds just look like clouds. In here, no answers, another swing and miss. After my mother died, the first few things I did was read books um, about loss, which really helped me. Some of my favorite poetry books, one of them being The Great Fires by Jack Gilbert, which is one of my favorite poetry books ever. Please read it if you haven't. And because I couldn't find words of my own at that time, using his words to create what we call a cento, or a poem that is kind of stitched together from the lines of another poet, um, was one of the first ways that I was able to write about this idea. So this poem is called After. I came back from the funeral, going over and over afterward what we should have done instead of what we did. Silence and the smell of heavy sunlight. There is no handbook, no map. Often it is hard to know when the middle game is over and the end game is beginning. It's hard to watch things humiliated the way death does it. The day she came back from the hospital, the muffled, sweet moans changed as she changed. A primitive, a primitive radio at the core, unable to find words. At the edge of emptiness, absence and heat everywhere. She knows her life is over. The sadness makes her fine, like the faint sound of a cello very late at night, somewhere below in the stillness. A stillness so complete, you hear the whispering inside of you. There is no hurry now. We die and are put into the earth forever. How strange and fine to get so near to it. Soft machinery of the dark. Um, I'm going to just kind of keep reading here. And then if you have questions or comments, please feel free to put them on the side, which we can get to at the end. Many of the poems deal more with kind of just the general confusion and disorder of feeling lost, um, and knowing that things are uncertain and that there's a lot of doubt, whether they were poems about that time or poems that came earlier. So this poem is a poem that was written before my parents got ill, just a kind of about the general feeling that as you get older, there's a kind of always a dark subject in the foreground. You know, something bad is eventually going to happen. I want to thank Emery DiGiorgio for helping workshop this poem when it was first written. This poem is called Cash. Buried inside canisters of sugar and flour, half-baked lines about spring. All winter we layer and moan, hope for a lick of flame to tongue away the shiver. Shuffled into a sheath of receipts, admissions that I need to keep, to read as proof. I couldn't hold on. I held on the best I could. Tucked tight into the pockets of old robes, grievances no one will hear. A bomb drops into my sleep and nothing is right with the world. All night it ticks. This one's called Détente. Branches carve commands onto the sky. Open, breathe, cathedral. A language I must relearn. The blue of lakes so different than the one of bruise or bullet. My shadow splits in two, one at my back, black as a fire-scarred clearing, the other in front, thin and brimming with tree-speckled light. All three of us walk past the tiny cemetery, 23 neat headstones beside the lake, the coffins I imagine settled in some quiet, sandy dark. Wind stirs the grass and the Queen Anne's lace into song, each blade pitch perfect. Even my shadows, sooted brutes, reconnect into a sort of applause. How can I be lost in a world that cracks its heart to please me, pushing life up and flowering despite everything? I swallow the bomb in my mouth, feel it swell my belly. Today is not for burning. Didn't plan that, but there's both an internal bomb in both of those poems. So I guess nice juxtaposition there. I'm trying to read poems I haven't read at other readings before, so I apologize for a couple little stumbles. The next poem is called Tunneling, and this is more about a poem about loss. I will not tend this loss with clouds or feathers. This loss requires nettles, calls for flagellation. This loss is sacrificial, Lenten, swollen with regret. Remembrance is sold as a tender thing, wreathed in flowers, shot with a Vaseline lens. I do not buy it. This loss itemizes each heave and raw deal. This loss makes brittle twigs of my ribcage. Grief has no easy remedy, and the cold seeps into each sleepless toss to twist me broken. This loss claws its way up the windpipe. This loss rumbles the gut. A coward mourns by weeping, tears gentle and soft, a caress of saline, a simple fix that tricks the body into thinking it is healed. Bring me teeth, sharp and ripping flesh, the rack that rends each ligament. Let the ghost come dancing, let the wolves come too. I will laud the dust and clamor, the mess of it. Reverence requires a regular cleave and mending of the heart. Watch me hold it in my hands until my hands can no longer hold. That poem actually, again, came from a prompt from poet Philip B. Williams on Twitter. It was very helpful to me when writing about these things that were very close to kind of use outside sources as a way to get started. Otherwise, I would never have gotten anything onto the paper, and getting things onto the paper was very helpful for me. I'll read a couple more short poems, and I'm still watching to see if there are any questions that have come up that I can answer. Um, Tell us about revision. Okay, I'm going to read this one poem, and then I'm going to talk about revision before I read the next one, because it's a good one to talk about that with. This poem is uh, based on a photograph that I took a long time ago of a face carved on a cathedral that, because of weather damage and age, has stains that looks like it's weeping. It's one of the favorite photographs I've ever taken, and it was a good starting point for thinking about this poem, which is called Guilt Dream as a Statue Far from Woods or Sea. My father hides in the white branches, wrapped in a tapestry of ash and twig. Impatient, he paces, marks the motion of the sun across the sky. I stand sculpted, a bronze in the courtyard, rooted and strangled with wild foliage. My mother floats in the wide ocean, moored to a splintered mast. Impatient, she heaves a sea-stained sigh, minds how the moon rises in the night. Through patinated eyes, I watch her drowning. I see him lost. I cannot move or change a thing. Um, the last couple of poems I plan to read are more love poems. So we'll talk a little bit about revision. I have a tendency to be a um, lay everything out on the page drafter. I still draft longhand in journals, I would say 95% of the time, starting with a bit of language or an image or something that kind of sparks my interest. And you noticed most of my poems have been quite short. Um, I am what I call a whittler as a poet rather than an architect. I start with a big jumble of a mess and usually end up honing it down to something that looks to me or sounds to me like a poem. And I know some people very carefully build their poems line by line and think a lot about um, how to how each line builds on the next line. And I have a tendency to get all the ideas out first, and then in the revision process is when I play with lineation and play with form and decide what stays in and what goes out and if something else is necessary. So revision is actually my favorite part of writing. Right, the drafting part is hard, right? And once you get it down, it's really quite a pleasure to work through it over and over again until either I abandon it because it's just not working, or I get to a point where there's something that I really like. Sometimes I will go back and what I call a journal dive. Like I'll steal good lines from failed poems and then try and do something with them um, to get something new started. So that's a little bit about revision. I have three short poems left. So I'm going to read two of them, and then someone asked about organizing the book and the repeated images. And so I'll answer both of those questions because you've already heard some images repeat in some of these poems. I think it's a great question. This one's very short. It's called 1 Year Later. Asleep, I swing between their ghosts, a hammock of burlap and guilt. Awake, I twist my limbs to hex, a helix, reaching for their smoke. The mirror smudged with fingerprints, X's and O's slipped in the steam. Every morning I hear their sighs. The doorknob turns, only wind sweeps in. Uh, that poem was originally about 3 pages long, and now it is 8 lines. So that's a little bit about how I revise. Way back when I started thinking about a third book after my second book was published, I was I've always been obsessed with Moby Dick by Herman Melville, but I did a reread and I pulled out all this language that I was just stunned by, and I thought was so beautiful, and I started writing poems that were using lines from Moby Dick either as titles or embedded somewhere in the poem or a little bit of both. And a lot of the love poems, believe it or not, came out of the use of Moby Dick. Um, and so this next one is one of those. When we were putting the book together, and I was very lucky to work with Jeremy Michael Reed, who was a wonderful editor, who did question the position of some of the poems, and we had great discussions about where they should go and where when they should appear. There had to be a little bit of a linear narrative in terms of some of the poems that are about caretaking and then losing my parents, and then the aftermath of that. So that had to stay linear in a way. But the other poems that are in the collection did not have to be linear. They kind of serve as breaks from like the straight on, hit you in the middle of the face, grief poems. We needed those breaks, and love is a great break from grief. And some of the poems, like I said, are just generally more about this feeling of helplessness or kind of uncertainty or doubt. And so those kind of did fit very carefully in between. The collection, the end of the collection used to end on a different poem, and through a suggestion of Jeremy's, now I think it ends on the perfect poem. But one of the love poems in the book is one of the Melville poems, and then I'll end with a poem that's more hopeful and then talk a little bit about images as we talk about those. So a lot of the water imagery, the sea imagery, um, came from the fact that I love the ocean and don't live anywhere near one, but also from the Moby Dick uh, obsession and taking some lines from that book. So this is one of the love poems called "Not the Least Among the Strange Things." The way you cup my face, though, as though receiving alms, ignore my continual quiver of worry, the peculiar perils of it, steel your bones against our inclement age. Like tug captains, we tow the old burdens around the world. You at the wheel, my eyes on the horizon, blending our thoughts with the cadence of waves. Each day we oil the hinges of our jaws, fill a convenient closet with days and years already past, each creak of our paltry joints a half-throttled shriek. But skin still seeks skin, and when we cannot sleep, we slip out onto the silent deck and, like the old astronomers, look up and sing out for new stars. Um, I'll answer that last question about images before I end with one poem. Um, I have a strong tendency to use images from the natural world because that's where I feel connected. And it doesn't need to, I don't live near mountains or any kind of grand geographical feature, but just being with trees. I love trees. My son and my husband will attest on many vacations where they can't find me and they find me taking pictures of trees. Um, but little things like the Queen Anne's lace that grows along the side of the road, um, or even roadkill, which is featured in the title poem of the book pretty prominently. Um, they're just the things that I'm surrounded with, and they're things that soothe me. Nature's soothing to me, and so there's a lot of natural imagery in the book, and so I think because of that, it replaces. And there are a lot of images of light in the book, and you'll see that in this last poem. And I think uh, the idea that in a time where you feel dark, where everything around you seems like it's closing in on you, till you look for light. And so that these poems were looking for light in a lot of places, whether that was the sun or a lantern or a firefly or whatever the case may be. Um, a bedside lamp, you'll see light in a lot of places in the book. And there was one more question about whittling, which I'll try to answer quickly before we read this last poem, because I know we have 30 minutes. Um, I think for me, a lot of times what I'll do when I look at a big splayed draft is I'll go back and underline the lines for me that stand out, that seem like more than ordinary language, that seem like something interesting that I might want to write more deeply into, um, that seem like the core or where the heat of the poem is. I usually rewrite those lines still in the journal, still longhand, and see if there are connections between them that could be made, if there are interesting juxtapositions that when I take out the extraneous material I hadn't seen before. Um, and then once I move to the computer, which is usually on the third or fourth draft or version, then I just kind of get really picky. And I have some trusted readers who, if I'm really unsure about whether something should stay or go, that I will ask for help, and get opinions. It doesn't mean that I always do what they say, but it's always nice to get another perspective. And I think that that process is sometimes very slow for me and sometimes very fast. Like I can see very quickly what needs to go and what needs to stay. And other times I struggle for a very long time, have to put something away until I finally look at it again and see either what's missing or what could be done or even taken out more, to make the poem more successful and more image driven. I've been really trying to make my poems more image driven, even though many of the poems in this book ended up being narratives to tell part of the story. I guess that's the best answer I have off the cuff. I'd have to think about it a little bit more. So I am going to read you the last poem. Uh, Language warning if any of your little children are watching, there's an F-bomb in this poem. Um, but you'll see the light uh, and the dark in this poem. So I think it's a good one to end with. And then we'll see maybe if if we have any other quick questions, and then I know we're done at 6:30. So thank you for being here. I see familiar names, and it's really lovely to see you here. Point your friends this to the Poets in Pajamas page. If they weren't able to come, they can listen at another time. And put in a little plug for the official book launch Zoom event for my book. It's taking place on November 10th, and you can find that event here on Facebook. So the last poem that I'm going to read is called Resolutions. I look for ways to manage time, force tulips to bloom in summer, formulate a plan to eat more fish. I will fail because I am better at fucking up and flapping my arms toward the sun as I plummet. Somewhere in the future, my death hums toward me in a ghostly fog. The forest tangles, dense, the sky gargantuan. For so long I have been feeling my way, groping for edges in the dark. I want the lights on, God. I want whatever time I have to be lit by some sort of fire. And that's the last poem I have. So unless we have any other questions, I want to really thank you again for coming. Thank you, Sundress, for asking me to do this, my first Facebook Live. So now that I know how to do it, I'm very excited. Thank you to Annie and to Sarah for their help in getting this set up. And thank to all of you again for coming. It's been a pleasure to read poems to you on a Sunday evening or afternoon, depending on where you are. And hopefully I will see you virtually soon at another event. Thank you very much. Good night.